The slap echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous marble hall, a sound so sharp and violent it seemed to crack the very air. Damien Sterling, a man whose name was synonymous with success, froze in the grand archway of his own living room. Before him was a scene from a nightmare. Isabella, his fiancée, the woman he adored, had her hand raised, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of pure venom. And on the floor, clutching her cheek, was his mother, Eleanor, a fragile, silver-haired woman whose only crime was to love her son. The world tilted on its axis, the lavish tapestries and priceless artworks blurring into a meaningless smear of colour. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Isabella, his gentle, sophisticated Isabella, whose laughter was like music, was standing over his mother with the fury of a predator. He had walked in, eager to share news of a new business triumph, only to be met with the ugliest truth he had ever faced. Time seemed to slow, each heartbeat a painful drum against his ribs. He saw the shock, then the fear, then the defiant shame flash across Isabella's eyes as she realized he was watching. His mother simply stared at the floor, a single tear tracing a path through the faint powder on her cheek, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to Isabella's screeching rage. "She was insulting me, Damien!" Isabella's voice, usually so smooth and melodic, was shrill and ragged. "She called me a gold digger, after everything I've done for you, for this family. She's a bitter, jealous old woman who can't stand to see you happy." The words were a torrent of poison, designed to wound and deflect. Damien's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the monster before him. His mother had never spoken an unkind word in her life. She was the bedrock of his world, the one who had sacrificed everything to raise him from the poverty of his childhood to the gilded cage he now occupied. He took a step forward, his legs feeling like lead, his throat tight with a mixture of rage and profound sorrow. He opened his mouth to speak, to scream, to demand an explanation, but no words came. The betrayal was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. He looked from his weeping mother on the floor to the seething rage of his fiancée, and felt a chasm open up in his life, a crack so deep he knew nothing would ever be the same again. It was in this frozen, terrible moment that the unthinkable happened. It wasn't a shout or a dramatic gesture. It was something far quieter and far more powerful. From the shadows of the hallway, a figure emerged. It was Amina, the housemaid. A young woman who was usually so quiet and unobtrusive, she was practically invisible. She had been hired a few months ago, a recommendation from a local church group, and was known for her diligence and respectful silence. She moved with a grace that defied her simple uniform, her steps measured and deliberate. She did not look at Damien. She did not look at Isabella. Her eyes were fixed solely on the crumpled figure of Eleanor on the floor. Without a word, she knelt down, her movements fluid and gentle, and helped the older woman to her feet. She straightened Eleanor's shawl, her touch infinitely tender, a silent rebuke to the violence that had just occurred. Isabella scoffed, ready to unleash a fresh wave of fury on the impertinent servant. "And who do you think you are?" she spat, turning her anger towards this new, unexpected target. Amina finally lifted her gaze, and the look in her eyes was not one of fear or subservience. It was a look of ancient calm, of profound and unshakable certainty. It was the look of a judge about to pass sentence. Amina's voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the tension-filled room with the clarity of a bell. "You will not touch this woman again," she said, her English precise, carrying a weight that made the simple words feel like a royal decree. She positioned herself slightly in front of Elena, a humble guardian in a plain black dress, facing down the woman adorned in diamonds and silk. Isabella let out a laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. "You're fired! Get out of this house this instant!" But Amina did not flinch. Her gaze remained locked on Isabella, and a strange, sad wisdom flickered in their depths. Damien was still paralyzed watching this unbelievable scene unfold. He was the billionaire, the master of this house, yet he was a mere spectator in a drama that seemed to have its own ancient rules. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, tilting away from wealth and status towards something far more fundamental. Amina was no longer just a maid. She was a force, a silent protector who had just drawn a line in the sand that no one dared to cross. The air crackled with unspoken history and hidden truths. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with questions. Damien finally found his voice, a strained whisper. "Amina, what is going on?" But it wasn't Amina who answered. It was the chilling finality in her next words, directed only at Isabella, that truly shattered the foundations of Damien's world. She took a small, almost imperceptible step forward, her presence suddenly filling the vast room, diminishing the furious fiancé to nothing more than a spoiled child. Her voice dropped lower, a conspiratorial and menacing tone that sent a shiver down Damien's spine. He saw Isabella's face pale, the bravado draining away to be replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated fear. Amina leaned in slightly, as if sharing a secret only the two of them would understand, yet her words were clear enough for all to hear. They were the words that would ignite a firestorm, revealing a web of deceit so dark and complex, it would threaten to consume them all. "I said you will not touch her," Amina repeated, her voice now as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "Because I know who you really are, Rachel." The wrong name hung in the air, a devastating accusation that promised a story far more terrifying than a simple moment of abuse. To understand the depth of that single shocking moment, we must turn back the clock 6 months, to a world where the name Rachel meant nothing to Damien Sterling. His world was one of numbers, of stock market fluctuations and corporate takeovers. He had built his empire from the ground up, a testament to a relentless work ethic forged in the fires of a childhood where every meal was a victory. He was a good man, but a lonely one. His wealth had built walls around him, making it impossible to know who was genuine and who was drawn to the glittering allure of his fortune. Then, Isabella Dubois entered his life like a sudden brilliant sunrise. They met at a charity gala, an event he usually despised. He was standing by a balcony seeking refuge from the meaningless chatter when she approached him. She wasn't like the others who tried to gain his attention with flattery and overtures. She spoke to him about the stars, about the ancient baobab tree visible in the moonlight, about a book she had just read. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her mind, her seeming depth that truly captivated him. She carried herself with an elegance and grace he had only ever seen in old films, a picture of old-world sophistication. Their courtship was a whirlwind, a blur of private jet trips to exotic islands, candlelit dinners in Paris, and quiet walks through his sprawling estate gardens. Isabella seemed to understand him in a way no one else ever had. She wasn't impressed by his billions. She claimed to be drawn to the man he was underneath it all. She spoke of her own privileged but lonely upbringing in a wealthy European family, painting a picture of a shared experience, of two souls finding solace in each other. Damien, who had spent his life building defences, found himself dismantling them brick by brick. He fell in love deeply and completely with the woman she presented herself to be. He introduced her to his mother, Elena, the most important person in his world. He watched with a swelling heart as Isabella charmed her, listening to Eleanor's stories of the old days with rapt attention, treating her with a deference and kindness that seemed utterly sincere. Elena had been hesitant at first, her maternal instincts wary of the whirlwind romance, but even she was eventually won over by Isabella's perfect performance. The engagement was inevitable, a spectacular affair with a diamond ring that made international headlines. Damien had never been happier. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. Isabella was his partner, his confidant, his future. She seamlessly integrated into his life, advising him on art acquisitions, helping him design a new wing for the local hospital, and charming his business associates. She was perfect. Too perfect. The first crack in the flawless facade was so small he almost missed it. They were visiting the small, modest neighborhood where he had grown up, a place he returned to every year to fund community projects. He was speaking with an old woman who used to give him bread when his own family had none, his arm wrapped around her frail shoulders. He glanced back at Isabella, expecting to see the warm, compassionate smile he had come to love. Instead, for a fleeting second, he saw a flicker of something else in her eyes as she looked at the humble surroundings. A faint, almost imperceptible curl of her lip, a look of distaste, of disdain. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual radiant smile as she came forward to greet the old woman. He told himself he had imagined it, a trick of the light, a projection of his own insecurities about his past. He was Damien Sterling, the billionaire, but he would never forget the boy who had nothing. He pushed the memory aside, burying it under the weight of his love and trust. But the seed of doubt, once planted, has a way of growing in the dark. A few weeks later, another incident occurred. His mother, Eleanor, had cooked a traditional meal for them, a recipe passed down through generations. It was the food of his childhood, simple, hearty, and full of love. Damien ate with relish, savouring the taste of home. Isabella, however, merely picked at her food, pushing it around her plate with a polite smile. "It's very rustic, Elena," she had said, the word rustic landing with the soft thud of an insult. "My palate is more accustomed to French cuisine, I'm afraid." Again, the comment was subtle, couched in the language of polite preference, but the underlying message was clear. His culture, his mother's love expressed through food, was somehow lesser, unsophisticated. Eleanor had simply smiled, a sad, knowing look in her eyes, and cleared the plates. Damien had felt a pang of defensiveness for his mother, but Isabella had quickly changed the subject, her charm a disarming weapon that smoothed over any awkwardness. He convinced himself he was being too sensitive, that he couldn't expect a woman of her background to instantly embrace his humble origins. The final warning sign came a month before the incident in the living room. They were planning the wedding, a grand event that was set to be the social highlight of the year. The guest list was a constellation of the world's most powerful and influential people. When Damien insisted on inviting his extended family from his ancestral village, farmers, teachers, and craftsmen, Isabella had balked. "Darling, must we?" she'd asked, her voice a silken caress. "It's just, they wouldn't fit in. Think of the image we need to project. This wedding isn't just a celebration, it's a statement." He had been hurt, arguing that these were his people, the roots of his tree. She had relented, but with a sigh of theatrical resignation that made him feel foolish and sentimental. He saw it then, if only for a moment. Her love was conditional, her acceptance predicated on him erasing the parts of himself that didn't fit her pristine narrative. Each of these moments was a small tremor, a warning of the earthquake to come. But he was a man blinded by a love so profound he chose to ignore the rumbling ground beneath his feet right up until the moment he walked in and saw his world collapse and heard a quiet housemaid speak a name that was not his fiancée's. Elena Sterling was not a fragile woman. Her hair may have been silver and her hands wrinkled with age, but her spirit was forged from steel. She had raised Damien alone, working 2 jobs, scrubbing floors and cleaning the homes of the wealthy, all while instilling in her son the values of integrity, humility, and perseverance. She had watched him rise, her heart swelling with a pride so immense it often brought tears to her eyes. She lived with him in his mansion not because she needed his wealth, but because he needed her wisdom. She was his anchor, the constant star in his ever-changing sky. When Damien brought Isabella home, Eleanor's internal alarms, honed by a lifetime of reading people, had gone off immediately. She saw the practiced perfection, the smile that didn't quite reach the eyes, the way Isabella's gaze would subtly scan a room, assessing its value. But she also saw the genuine, unadulterated joy in her son's eyes, a joy she hadn't seen since he was a small boy. For his sake, she had silenced her doubts, choosing to offer warmth and acceptance. She had prayed she was wrong, that her old instincts had finally failed her. As the months went on, Elena's unease grew. It wasn't anything she could pinpoint, nothing concrete she could present to Damien without sounding like the cliché of a jealous mother. It was in the small things. The way Isabella would subtly correct her grammar in front of guests, the expensive gifts she would give, which felt less like tokens of affection and more like transactions, as if she were paying for Elena's approval. Elena saw the subtle manipulations, the way Isabella was slowly isolating Damien from his old life, from the very roots that made him strong. She felt like a silent observer in her own home, watching a beautiful, venomous vine slowly wrap itself around her precious son. She knew she couldn't fight Isabella directly. The woman was too clever, too skilled at playing the victim. Any direct accusation would be twisted, making Eleanor look like a possessive, delusional old woman. She needed a different kind of ally. She needed a pair of eyes and ears in the house that Isabella would underestimate, someone who could move through the background unnoticed, a quiet guardian for the family's soul. That was when she began her search for a new housemaid. Elena didn't go through a high-end agency. She went to the local community centre, the one Damien's foundations supported heavily. She put the word out that she was looking for someone diligent, quiet, and, most importantly, someone with good character. Dozens of women applied, but Eleanor was looking for a specific quality she couldn't define. She was looking for a feeling, a sense of inner strength that wealth could not buy and hardship could not break. When Amina walked in for the interview, Eleanor knew she had found her. The young woman was unassuming, dressed in simple but clean clothes. She spoke calmly and answered every question with a thoughtful sincerity. But it was her eyes that truly captivated Eleanor. They held a deep, quiet intelligence and a history of sorrow that had been met not with bitterness, but with a profound resilience. There was a stillness about her, a centeredness that was rare in someone so young. Eleanor saw a fellow spirit, a woman who understood the world from the bottom up, who knew the difference between glitter and gold. She hired Amina on the spot, not just as a maid, but as a silent ally in a war no one else knew she was fighting. Their bond formed quickly, in the quiet moments of the day. It was in the shared smiles over a cup of herbal tea in the kitchen, in the way Amina would listen patiently to Eleanor's stories, her hands busy polishing silver. Amina never pried, never gossiped, but she observed everything. Eleanor would watch as Isabella dismissed Amina with a wave of her hand, treating her as little more than a piece of furniture, never realizing the sharp, perceptive mind that was cataloguing every inconsistency, every lie, every flash of cruelty. Amina became Eleanor's confidant without ever needing to speak of the central problem. They communicated in knowing glances, in shared silences. Elena would tell a story about Damien's childhood, a lesson about honesty, and watch Amina nod, in understanding, her eyes flicking towards Isabella for just a second. Amina, in turn, would ensure Elena's favourite shawl was always nearby, or that her medication was brought to her on time, small acts of care that were a stark contrast to Isabella's performative, hollow gestures. They were two women from different generations, different worlds, united in their silent, protective love for Damien. Elena never told Amina her suspicions outright. She didn't need to. She simply created the environment for the truth to be observed. She trusted Amina's character completely. She knew that if the moment ever came, if Isabella ever showed her true face, Amina would not be a passive bystander. She had sensed the steel beneath the young woman's quiet demeanour, the unshakable moral compass that guided her. What Eleanor did not know, however, was the true terrifying extent of Isabella's deception. She had no idea that she hadn't just hired a woman of good character. She had, by a twist of fate so incredible it could only be destiny, hired the one person on the entire continent who held the key to unlocking Isabella's dark past. She had brought a witness into the heart of the enemy's camp, a silent avenger waiting for the moment to speak the truth. And when she felt the sting of Isabella's hand against her cheek, a part of her deep down was not entirely surprised. She was simply waiting for the inevitable, for the quiet woman she had trusted with her home to step out of the shadows and do what she was always meant to do. The name Rachel hung in the air, electric and damning. Damien's world, which had been cracked by the slap, was now utterly shattered. He stared at Amina, then at Isabella or Rachel, whose face had gone ghost white. The mask of indignant fury had been replaced by the cold, hard panic of a cornered animal. All the small inconsistencies, the subtle red flags he had so diligently ignored, now rushed back to him, forming a coherent and terrifying picture. The disdain for his old neighborhood, the condescending remarks about his mother's food, the desire to erase his family from their wedding. It wasn't snobbery. It was the calculated strategy of a predator trying to sever its prey from the herd. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Isabella finally broke it, her voice a desperate, trembling whisper. "She's lying." I don't know what she's talking about. She's a delusional, vindictive servant. Damien, you can't possibly believe her over me. She reached for his arm, her touch now feeling like ice against his skin. He recoiled instinctively, a small movement that spoke volumes. The trust he had placed in her, the love he felt for her, was hemorrhaging, draining away with every passing second. He turned to his mother, who was now standing beside Amina, her expression one of profound sadness rather than anger. "Mama," he said, his voice hoarse, "what is this? Do you know about this?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "I only know what my heart told me, my son, that this woman's spirit was not right for you. I did not know her name, but I knew her character. I trusted Amina to see what I could feel." His gaze then shifted to Amina, the quiet woman who now stood at the center of this storm. "Amina," he commanded, his voice regaining some of its authority. "Explain yourself. What does this mean? Who is Rachel?" Amina met his gaze without flinching, her loyalty clear. "Sir, with all due respect, my story is not the one that matters right now. My first duty is to your mother. The full truth can wait. What matters is that this woman," she gestured towards Isabella, "is a liar, and she is dangerous." Isabella let out a strangled sob. "This is a conspiracy, the jealous mother and the ambitious maid, plotting against me. Damien, my love, you have to choose. It's them, or me." The ultimatum was a gamble, a desperate last-ditch effort to regain control. Damien felt as though he were being torn in two. One part of him, the logical part, saw the evidence mounting, saw the genuine fear in Isabella's eyes that looked far more like guilt than innocence. But the other part, the heart, was still tangled in the beautiful lie she had woven around him for months. He had loved her. He had planned a future with her. To accept this new reality was to accept his own blindness, his own foolishness. He looked at his mother, her quiet strength a lighthouse in his confusion. He looked at Amina, whose calm certainty was unnerving. And he looked at Isabella, her face now a pleading, tear-streaked mess, a performance he could no longer be sure was real. He knew he couldn't get the full truth here, not like this. He needed time to think, to process the seismic shock that had just upended his life. He needed to separate the truth from the lies, the woman he loved from the monster she might be. He took a deep breath, the decision solidifying in his mind. It wasn't the choice Isabella wanted, but it was the only one he could make. "Isabella," he began, his voice low and steady, "I am not choosing anyone right now. But what I saw with my own eyes is inexcusable. You laid your hands on my mother. Nothing in this world can justify that." He walked over to Eleanor and put his arm around her, a definitive act of allegiance. "Before we discuss anything else, your name, Amina's accusations, our future, you will apologize to my mother. A true, sincere apology. And she will be the one to decide if it is accepted." Isabella stared at him, her mind racing, calculating. He could see the gears turning behind her tear-filled eyes. This was a temporary setback for her, a hoop she had to jump through to salvage the situation. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Of course, darling. You're right. I was overwrought. I am so sorry, Elena. I beg for your forgiveness." Her apology was directed at his mother, but her eyes were locked on him, pleading for his belief. Elena remained silent, her expression unreadable. Damien knew this was far from over. It was merely the end of the first battle in a war for his soul. The air was still thick with tension, a fragile truce declared but not yet won. The question of Rachel remained unanswered, a ghost haunting the opulent room. Damien knew he had to get to the bottom of it, but first he had to ensure his mother was safe and his own mind was clear. He watched Isabella, the woman he thought he would spend his life with, and, for the first time, he saw a stranger. This entire situation is a whirlwind of emotion and betrayal, isn't it? It makes you wonder what you would do if you were in Damien's shoes. How would you handle such a shocking revelation about someone you love? Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? It's incredible to think how stories like this can connect us all, no matter the distance. If you're finding yourself gripped by this tale, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Sharing it with a friend who loves a good story helps more than you know. Now, let's see what happens next. The apology was a masterpiece of theatre. The next morning, Isabella approached Eleanor in the sun-drenched conservatory where the older woman liked to read. She carried no expensive gifts, a calculated move to appear more sincere. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying all night. She knelt before Eleanor, a gesture of profound humility that was so perfectly executed it seemed rehearsed. Her voice was soft, laced with a tremor of what sounded like genuine remorse. She spoke of her own troubled childhood, painting a vague but moving picture of a demanding father and a cold mother, hinting at a deep-seated fear of not being good enough. She claimed Eleanor's initial wariness of her had triggered these old wounds, causing her to lash out in a moment of insecurity and pain. She confessed her shame, her horror at her own actions, and begged for a chance to prove that the woman who struck her was not the real Isabella. It was a flawless performance, hitting every note of contrition and vulnerability. Damien, watching from the doorway, felt his resolve begin to waver. Perhaps he had been too quick to judge. Perhaps it was a single terrible mistake, born of hidden trauma and not a sign of a deeper malice. Eleanor, ever gracious, listened patiently. She placed a gentle hand on Isabella's bowed head. "A heart that is sorry is a heart that can heal," she said, her voice calm and even. "I accept your apology." Relief washed over Damien's face. Isabella looked up, tears of gratitude welling in her eyes, and hugged the older woman. It was a picture of reconciliation, of forgiveness. But as Isabella pulled away, her eyes met Eleanor's, and for a split second the performance faltered. A flicker of triumph, of cold, calculating victory flashed in her gaze. It was a look that said, "I won." Elena saw it, and her smile, though outwardly warm, did not reach her own eyes. Later, when she was alone with Amina in the kitchen, Eleanor simply shook her head. "A snake may shed its skin," she murmured, her voice heavy. "But it is still a snake." Amina nodded in silent agreement. The apology had changed nothing. It had only proven how skilled their adversary truly was at the art of deception. The game had not ended. It had simply become more dangerous, more subtle. Over the next few days, Isabella was the model of a repentant fiancée. She doted on Elena, bringing her tea, reading to her, and listening to her stories with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. She was attentive and affectionate towards Damien, constantly reassuring him of her love and her commitment to being a better person. She was playing her part so well that Damien began to feel a profound sense of guilt. He had allowed a servant's strange accusation to nearly destroy his relationship. He had doubted the woman he loved. The name Rachel was dismissed as the nonsensical rambling of a disgruntled employee. He even considered letting Amina go, but his mother insisted she stay, saying she had grown fond of the girl's quiet presence. Damien, wanting to keep the peace, agreed. He was slowly being lulled back into the beautiful dream Isabella had constructed, the memory of the slap fading, being recontextualized as a single anomalous event. He wanted to believe in her. It was easier to believe in her than to face the terrifying alternative, that his entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies. He was so close to surrendering, to letting the last of his doubts wash away. He and Isabella were in his study one evening, planning their rescheduled wedding, the atmosphere light and full of renewed hope. They were laughing, the easy, familiar sound he had missed so much. Just as he was leaning in to kiss her, there was a quiet knock on the door. It was Marcus, his head of security, and a man he had known since childhood. Marcus was a former Special Forces operative, a man of few words and unwavering loyalty. He looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting from Damien to Isabella. "Sir," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Apologies for the interruption, but I have something for you. It's personal." He held out a plain manila envelope. Damien took it, a sense of confusion and vague irritation rising within him. "What is it, Marcus?" Isabella watched, her smile tight, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "You asked me to run a full background check a while back. When you first got engaged," Marcus explained, his eyes fixed on a point just over Damien's shoulder. "Standard procedure. Things got busy, and I forgot to give you the file. I was cleaning out my desk today and found it. You should probably read it." A cold dread began to creep up Damien's spine. A background check. He had ordered it as a formality, a precaution his security team insisted upon for anyone who entered his inner circle. He had never even thought to ask for the results, so complete was his trust in Isabella. He looked at the envelope in his hand, then at Isabella, who was trying to maintain a look of pleasant curiosity, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the arm of her chair. The room suddenly felt cold, the easy laughter of moments ago, a distant echo from another lifetime. Marcus gave a curt nod and backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind him, leaving a deafening silence in his wake. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in Damien's hand, as if it contained not papers, but the crushing weight of a truth he was no longer sure he wanted to know. Isabella forced a light laugh. "Well, how mysterious. Go on, darling, open it. I'm sure it's just a lot of boring paperwork. Let's see what secrets your spy has uncovered about me." Her tone was playful, but her eyes dared him. A silent, desperate challenge. And in that moment, Damien knew with a sickening certainty that this envelope held the key to everything. With trembling fingers, Damien broke the seal on the manila envelope. The air in the study was thick with a tension so palpable it felt hard to breathe. Isabella watched him, her smile frozen on her face, a brittle mask of nonchalance. He pulled out a slim file, its pages filled with the cold, hard text of a private investigator's report. He started to read, his eyes scanning the first page, then the second. The blood drained from his face. Every word he read was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the entire edifice of the woman he thought he knew. Isabella Dubois, the sophisticated heiress from an old European family, did not exist. The report detailed a different life entirely. Her real name was Isabella Vance. Her parents were not wealthy aristocrats. They were retired schoolteachers living in a modest suburb, burdened by immense debt. The family's financial records were laid bare, showing a history of failed businesses and desperate loans. The prestigious boarding school she claimed to have attended had no record of her. The university degree she boasted of was a fabrication. It was all a lie, a meticulously crafted, breathtakingly audacious lie. He looked up from the papers, his eyes meeting hers. The shock and betrayal were so raw, so potent that he felt dizzy. "Isabella Vance," he whispered, the name feeling foreign and ugly on his tongue. "Your parents are in debt? Everything you told me?" He couldn't finish the sentence. The scope of the deception was too vast to comprehend. For the first time, Isabella's composure shattered completely. The mask fell away, and he saw the raw, desperate panic beneath. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were not the controlled, performative tears he had seen before. These were tears of genuine fear. The fear of being exposed. "Damien, please!" she sobbed, rushing to his side, trying to take the papers from his hands. "Let me explain. I was going to tell you. I was just so ashamed." He pulled away from her, holding the file to his chest like a shield. "Ashamed? You lied to me about every single aspect of your life. Who are you?" His voice rose, shaking with a fury born of deep, profound hurt. He felt like a fool, a naive boy who had been played by a master manipulator. Her story came tumbling out, a torrent of excuses and justifications. She claimed she had fabricated her background because she was terrified he would reject her for her humble origins. She spun a tale of wanting to fit into his world, of feeling inadequate, of creating a persona she thought he would love. "But the love is real, Damien," she insisted, her hands clutching at his shirt. "Everything I feel for you is real. I fell in love with you, the man, not the money, the lies. They were just a way to get to you, to get past the walls you have up. I was wrong, I know I was. But please, please don't let this destroy us." She was a brilliant actress. Even now, faced with irrefutable proof of her deceit, she was twisting the narrative, trying to make herself the victim of her own ambition and love. And a small, foolish part of Damien wanted to believe her. His heart ached with the memory of their time together, of the laughter, the intimacy, the dreams they had shared. Was it all a performance? Or was it possible that real feelings could exist within such a tangled web of lies? He was lost, adrift in a sea of confusion and pain. He sank into his chair, the report lying open on his desk, a testament to his own gullibility. Isabella knelt before him, her face buried in his lap, her shoulders shaking with sobs. He was torn between the urge to push her away and the instinct to comfort her. Could he forgive this? Could they rebuild from the ashes of such a monumental betrayal? He looked past her, his gaze falling on the door of the study. It stood slightly ajar, and in the gap he could see the quiet, watchful figure of Amina. She had a tray in her hands, as if she were about to bring them refreshments, but she had stopped, clearly having overheard the confrontation. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held a deep, sorrowful wisdom. She seemed to be waiting. He remembered her words in the living room, the quiet certainty with which she had spoken. He had dismissed her as a meddling servant. But now he saw her differently. He saw her as the only person who had tried to tell him the truth. He felt a new wave of shame wash over him for having doubted her, for having been so easily manipulated. Just as a sliver of pity for Isabella began to work its way back into his heart, just as he was considering the possibility of forgiveness, the study door opened fully. Amina stepped into the room, her presence commanding a sudden silence. She placed the tray on a side table with a steady hand, the clink of porcelain unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. Isabella looked up, her tear-streaked face hardening with anger at the intrusion. "Get out!" she hissed, her voice venomous. But Amina ignored her. Her gaze was fixed on Damien, and her eyes were filled with a steely resolve. He had a feeling that what he had just read in the report was only the beginning, the tip of a very dark and dangerous iceberg. Amina took a step forward, her voice as calm and clear as it had been that terrible afternoon. "Sir," she said, her tone respectful but firm, leaving no room for argument, "you have been deceived. But you must understand that her family's debt and her made-up education, that is not the only lie she has told." The words hung in the air, a promise of a revelation far worse than anything he had just read. Damien stared at Amina, a sense of foreboding settling deep in his bones. Isabella scrambled to her feet, her face a mask of fury. "How dare you! Damien, are you going to let this woman, this nobody, continue to slander me?" But Damien held up a hand, silencing her. He looked at Amina, his eyes pleading for clarity in the chaos that had become his life. "What are you talking about, Amina? What other lie?" Amina took a deep, steadying breath, as if preparing to unearth a memory buried long ago. She did not seem intimidated by Isabella's rage or by the opulence of the room. She stood there, a simple woman in a plain uniform, and began to speak. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the study with the weight of her story. A story that began many years ago in a place far from the glittering world of billionaires and mansions. "I am not from this city, sir," she began. "I come from a small village in the north, a place called Kufama. We are a community of farmers. We do not have much money, but we have our land, our traditions, and each other." She spoke of her home with a deep and abiding love, painting a vivid picture of a close-knit community, of elders sharing wisdom under the shade of a mango tree, of children laughing as they chased goats through dusty paths. It was a world away from Damien's reality, yet he listened with rapt attention, sensing the importance of every word. "5 years ago," Amina continued, her voice growing heavy with sorrow, "a woman came to our village. She was beautiful, well-spoken, and dressed in fine city clothes. She told us she was from an NGO, a charity organization dedicated to helping rural communities. She promised to build a new well for us, so our women would no longer have to walk 5 miles for clean water. She promised a new school for our children." The hope in Amina's voice was still palpable, even after all this time. She described how the villagers had rejoiced, how they had celebrated this stranger who had come to them like an answer to their prayers. The woman had a proposal. She said her organization would match every shilling the village could raise. To show their commitment, the villagers needed to contribute. It was a test of their faith and their desire for progress. "We believed her," Amina said, a tremor of old pain in her voice. "We trusted her. My father, the village elder, sold 2 of his best cows. My mother gave her life savings, the money she had hidden under her mattress for my wedding. Every family gave what they could. We gathered all our money, a fortune for people like us, and we gave it to her in a ceremony. She wept with joy and told us we were a model community. She said she would return in 1 month with the engineers and the building materials to begin the work." Isabella stood frozen, her face ashen, a statue of dawning horror. She knew where this story was going. Damien felt a sickening lurch in his stomach, the pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed beginning to click into place. Amina's voice dropped to a near whisper. She never came back. We waited for weeks, then months. We tried to contact the NGO she mentioned. It did not exist. The address she gave us was an abandoned building. She had taken everything. She left our village broken. Some families never recovered. My own father died a year later, the shame and heartbreak having taken its toll on his spirit. She didn't just steal our money, sir. She stole our hope. A profound, heavy silence filled the room. The story was a simple one. A tale of cruel deception, but told with such raw, unvarnished emotion, it was devastating. Damien finally understood the source of the strength he had seen in Amina. It was the strength of someone who had survived the worst kind of betrayal, who had looked into the face of absolute evil and had endured. He couldn't bring himself to look at Isabella, but he could feel her presence, a vortex of toxic energy in the room. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core what was coming next. Amina reached into a small pocket in her apron, her movements slow and deliberate. She pulled out a small worn object. It was a photograph, its corners softened with time, its colours faded from the sun. It had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases were a permanent part of the image. With a steady hand, she placed the photograph on the polished mahogany of Damien's desk. "She called herself Jacqueline, then," Amina said, her voice devoid of hatred, filled only with a quiet, righteous finality. "This was taken during the ceremony, the day we gave her our money. My younger brother was very proud of his new camera phone." Damien leaned forward, his heart pounding against his ribs. The photograph showed a group of smiling villagers, their faces full of hope and celebration. And in the centre of them, holding a ceremonial gourd, was a younger woman. Her hair was different, her clothes less stylish, but the face was unmistakable. It was her. It was Isabella. The woman he loved, the woman he had asked to be his wife, smiling into the camera, surrounded by the very people whose lives she was about to destroy. The beautiful lie had finally met its ugly, undeniable truth. The faded photograph on the desk was more than just evidence. It was a ghost. It was the ghost of a woman named Jacqueline, the ghost of a village's stolen hope, and the ghost of the man Damien thought he was, a discerning, intelligent leader of industry, now revealed to be a blind, lovesick fool. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Isabella's ragged, shallow breathing. All the charm, all the sophistication, all the carefully constructed layers of her persona had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, ugly core of a con artist. She stared at the photograph as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. There were no more tears, no more excuses, no more performances. Her eyes, when they finally lifted to meet Damien's, were cold and hard. Like chips of obsidian. The transformation was terrifying. The soft, loving woman he had known was gone, replaced by this chilling stranger. The mask had not just fallen, it had been incinerated, and the monster that lived behind it was finally, horribly free. "So what?" she said, her voice a low, contemptuous sneer. The sudden shift from pleading victim to defiant villain was jarring. "It was years ago. People do what they have to do to survive. You, of all people, should understand that. You clawed your way up from nothing. How is what I did any different?" The audacity of the comparison, the attempt to equate his years of hard work and integrity with her predatory deceit was breathtaking. It was a final, desperate attempt to normalize her depravity, to drag him down to her level. But Damien was no longer listening with his heart. He was seeing with clear, cold eyes. He saw the woman who had abused his mother, the woman who had lied about her entire existence, and the woman who had callously destroyed an entire community for personal gain. They were not separate people. They were all one and the same. He finally understood that her cruelty towards his mother wasn't a momentary lapse, it was her nature. His mother, with her simple traditional values, represented everything Isabella, or Rachel or Jacqueline, despised and sought to exploit. "Get out," Damien said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get out of my house. Now." Isabella let out a short, bitter laugh. "It's not that simple, Damien. We're engaged. The whole world knows it. You think you can just throw me out? I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them how you treated me, how your jealous mother and her pet maid conspired against me. I will ruin you." The threats were empty, the desperate flailing of a drowning swimmer, but they revealed the true depths of her malice. She had never loved him. She had only ever loved what he could give her, and now that she was losing it, she was determined to burn his entire world to the ground. He stood up, his full height towering over her. The love he had felt was gone, replaced by a disgust so profound it made him feel physically ill. "You will do nothing, Isabella. You will walk out of that door with only what you came with. If you try to contact me or my family or the press, I will make sure this photograph and Amina's story find their way to the authorities. You preyed on the poor and the trusting. Now you've come up against someone who can fight back." A flicker of fear finally returned to her eyes. She knew he had the resources to destroy her. Her game was over. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of hatred, fury, and a strange, twisted kind of resentment, as if he were the one who had betrayed her. Then, in a final venomous tirade, she let it all out, all the poison she had kept hidden behind her beautiful smile. "You and your sanctimonious mother," she spat, her words dripping with acid. "You think you're so much better than me with your simple-minded morals. You're nothing. You're just as weak and pathetic as my first husband was, and his mother was even more annoying than yours." The words were meant to wound, but one phrase snagged in Damien's mind, sharp and lethal. My first husband. She had never mentioned a husband. According to her fabricated life story, she had been single, waiting for her one true love. The slip was unintentional, a product of her unrestrained rage, but it opened up a new, even darker door in this labyrinth of lies. A first husband? What had happened to him? The revelation hung in the air, a chilling new piece of the puzzle. It suggested this was not her first time playing this game, that her predatory behavior was a pattern. The story was so much bigger, so much more sinister than he could have ever imagined. Have you ever seen a situation like this, where someone's true character is suddenly and shockingly revealed? It's a terrifying thought. What would you do if you were in Damien's position, discovering that the person you plan to marry has a secret hidden past? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to bring more tales like this to you from every corner of the world. Now let's find out who this mysterious first husband was. The words "my first husband" echoed in the study long after Isabella, under the watchful eye of Marcus, had been escorted from the property with nothing but the clothes on her back. The immediate threat was gone, but a new, more sinister mystery had taken its place. Damien felt no relief, only a cold, creeping dread. This wasn't just a case of fraud or deception anymore. The casual, venomous way she had mentioned a previous husband sent a chill down his spine. It hinted at a history he had a terrifying feeling he needed to uncover, not just for his own peace of mind, but for the sake of potential justice. The first thing he did was not to celebrate, but to find his mother. He found her in the garden, calmly tending to her roses, as if the storm that had just ripped through their lives was nothing more than a passing breeze. He sat with her, and for the first time since he was a child, he wept. He wept for his own blindness, for the pain his choices had brought upon her, and for the loss of a love that had never been real. Eleanor simply held his hand, her touch a balm to his wounded soul. "A lesson is never pleasant while you are learning it, my son," she said softly, "but the wisdom it gives is priceless." His next action was to summon Amina. She came to the garden, standing respectfully a few paces away. He stood up and walked towards her, and to her surprise he bowed his head slightly. "Amina," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you more than I can ever repay. You tried to warn me and I was too deaf to listen. I am so sorry for not believing you. You have shown more loyalty and courage than anyone I have ever known." Amina's eyes glistened, but she simply nodded. "I only did what was right, sir. I could not stand by and watch her harm your family. She took my family's past. I could not let her take your family's future." In that moment, the distinction between employer and employee dissolved. He saw her not as a maid, but as a guardian, a woman of immense strength and integrity. He made a silent vow to not only restore what her village had lost, but to ensure she was honoured as the hero she was. He also finally understood why his mother had hired her. "Mama," he said, turning to Eleanor, "you knew. You felt something was wrong from the beginning. That's why you chose her, isn't it?" Elena smiled. "I did not know her story. I only knew her spirit. I saw in her eyes a strength that Isabella's beauty could never match. I wanted a true heart in this house, not just a pair of hands." With his emotional bearings somewhat restored, Damien went into action. He called Marcus into his study, the same room where his world had fallen apart just hours before. "Marcus," he said, his voice now cold and hard, stripped of all emotion. "She let something slip. A first husband. Her name isn't Dubois, it's Vance. Isabella Vance. I need you to find him. I need to know everything. Spare no expense. Use every resource we have. Dig into her entire life, from the day she was born. I want to know every secret she has." Marcus, who had seen his boss through corporate battles and market crashes, had never seen him like this. This wasn't business. This was a hunt. He simply nodded. "Consider it done, boss." The investigation was reignited, but this time, they weren't just looking for financial records. They were looking for a ghost. Marcus's team of investigators, some of the best in the world, worked around the clock. They combed through public records, sealed documents, and digital footprints, peeling back the layers of Isabella Vance's life. For 48 hours, there was an agonizing silence. Damien spent the time with his mother and Amina, the three of them forming a small, a tight-knit circle of trust amidst the grandeur of the empty mansion. The call from Marcus came late on the second night. "Damien," he said, his voice grim, "you need to see this." When Marcus arrived, his face was pale. He laid a new file on Damien's desk, thicker this time. "We found him," Marcus said quietly. "Her first husband. His name was Michael Renner, a tech entrepreneur. He was much older than her and very wealthy." Damien's blood ran cold. "Was?" he asked, dreading the answer. Marcus nodded. "He died 3 years ago. A boating accident. He was alone. It was ruled a tragic accident, but the circumstances were strange." Damien opened the file. Michael Renner smiled back at him from a photo, a kind-eyed man with a trusting face. He read on, his horror mounting with every line. Isabella, then known as Isabella Renner, had married him after a whirlwind 6-month romance. Just 2 weeks before his death, Michael had changed his will, leaving his entire fortune, his companies, and his properties to his new wife. His own children from a previous marriage were left with almost nothing. But it was the final detail, a small footnote in the report, that made Damien feel like he was going to be sick. It was a note about Michael Renner's elderly mother. Shortly after his death, she had contested the will, claiming her son had been manipulated. A week later, she was involuntarily committed to a psychiatric care facility with Isabella as her sole legal guardian. The pattern was undeniable and infinitely more sinister. The revelation that Isabella was not just a con artist but potentially a murderer changed everything. This was no longer a personal betrayal. It was a matter of life and death, of a predator who needed to be stopped before she could claim another victim. Damien's grief and anger coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. He couldn't just expose her to the authorities with what he had. The death had been ruled an accident, and the committal of her mother-in-law was, on paper, legal. Isabella was cunning. She would have covered her tracks meticulously. A direct accusation would lead to a messy public battle that she might even win, painting herself as a grieving widow harassed by a vindictive ex-fiancé. He needed more. He needed a confession. He needed to catch the snake in its own trap. He brought Marcus and Amina into his complete confidence. The three of them sat in his study, the very heart of his empire, and plotted. It was a strange war council. The billionaire, the ex-soldier, and the housemaid, united against a common deadly enemy. "She thinks I'm weak, that I'm just a heartbroken fool," Damien said, pacing the room. "We're going to use that. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants." The plan was audacious and incredibly dangerous. Damien would contact Isabella pretending to have had a change of heart. He would play the part of the desperate lover, unable to live without her, convinced by her lies that she was just a misunderstood woman who had made mistakes. He would tell her that he had fired Amina and had a terrible fight with his mother, choosing her over his own family. The bait would be irresistible, not just forgiveness, but total victory. He would tell her that he wanted to put the past behind them immediately, to elope to a private island where they could be alone, away from all the drama and judgment, and to prove his unwavering trust and love, he would transfer a substantial sum of money, $10 million, into a new joint offshore account that she would control. The entire mansion, inside and out, would be outfitted with state-of-the-art, covert recording equipment. Every word, every move would be captured. Amina's role was crucial. She would pretend to have been fired, tearfully leaving the mansion in front of Isabella's watchful eyes, only to circle back and operate as their inside source, coordinating with Marcus from a hidden control room set up in the guest cottage. The first step was the phone call. Damien's heart hammered in his chest as he dialed her number, his hands slick with sweat. He had to be a better actor than she had ever been. When she answered, her voice was cold and cautious. He began his performance, his voice breaking, telling her he had made a terrible mistake, that he was lost without her. He begged for her forgiveness. At first, she was skeptical, her replies clipped and suspicious. But as he continued, weaving a tale of desperate love and regret, he could hear the ice in her voice begin to thaw. When he mentioned the $10 million and the plan to elope, he heard a distinct shift in her tone. The hook was in. She agreed to meet him, to talk things over. She arrived at the mansion the next day playing the part of the wounded but willing to forgive lover. The reunion was a sickening parody of their former relationship, a hollow embrace captured by a dozen hidden cameras. Damien had to fight every instinct to recoil from her touch. He showed her the bank transfer confirmation, the money sitting in their new joint account. Her eyes lit up with a greedy fire that she quickly masked with a loving smile. The trap was set. Isabella moved back into the mansion, believing she had won completely. She was gloating, her arrogance making her careless. Damien, Marcus, and Amina watched the feeds from the control room whenever Damien could get away. They watched her preen in front of mirrors, trying on the new jewelry Damien had bought her as part of the ruse. They saw her making hushed phone calls, speaking in coded language. She was preparing her endgame. The plan was for Damien to elope with her in 2 days. He had to spend 48 hours living with the woman he now knew was a monster. A constant, nerve-wracking performance that drained every ounce of his emotional energy. He felt as though he were walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. The final evening before their planned departure arrived. Damien had just left the room, telling her he needed to finalize things with his pilot. The cameras in the master bedroom were rolling. Isabella, believing she was finally alone and unobserved, picked up her phone. She dialed a number. "It's me," she said, her voice low and excited. "Everything is perfect." He fell for it completely. "The money is in the account." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. "Yes, the plan is working perfectly. Get ready." She let out a small, cruel laugh, a sound that made the blood in Damien's veins run cold as he watched the monitor. He's even more gullible than the last one. Just be ready to move as soon as we land. Once the papers are signed, we take care of Damien the same way we took care of Michael. The confession was explicit, chilling, and undeniable. She had an accomplice. And she was planning to murder him. Marcus had a trace on the call. The police were on standby, and they had everything they needed. Victory was within their grasp. The control room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the servers recording Isabella's every word. Damien stared at the monitor, his face a grim mask of stone. The casual way she spoke of his murder, the dismissive tone she used when referring to her dead husband, Michael, was more chilling than any physical violence. This was pure, unadulterated evil, wrapped in a beautiful package. On another screen, Marcus had the results of the phone trace. "The call is going to a burner phone," he said, his voice tense, "but we've got a lock on its location. It's pinging from a penthouse suite at the Grand Lux Hotel downtown." He was already typing furiously, cross-referencing the hotel's guest list with financial records linked to Isabella. Within seconds, a name and a face appeared on the screen. "Got him," Marcus grunted. "The accomplice. His name is Julian Croft, a financial advisor. He's the one who first introduced Isabella to Damien at that charity gala." The web was complete. It wasn't just Isabella, it was a conspiracy. Croft had been her spotter, identifying wealthy, vulnerable targets for her to ensnare. They were a team of predators. "The police are ready to move on both locations," Marcus confirmed, speaking into a small microphone on his lapel. "They're just waiting for your signal, Damien." Damien nodded, his eyes still glued to the main screen. According to the plan, he was supposed to walk back into the bedroom now to finalize their elopement plans. Isabella was still on the phone, laughing with her accomplice. "Don't worry," she cooed into the receiver. "This time there will be no mistakes. A little something in his champagne on the plane. He'll be gone before we even land. It will look like a heart attack. Tragic, but not unexpected for a man under so much pressure." The sheer coldness of it all was staggering. Amina, standing beside Damien, placed a gentle hand on his arm, a silent gesture of support. She had faced this woman's evil and survived. Now it was time to ensure she could never harm anyone again. "Give the signal, Marcus," Damien said, his voice hard as steel. "Let's end this." Marcus spoke into his mic. "All units, execute. I repeat, execute." The plan was for a silent, coordinated takedown. One team would breach Julian Croft's hotel room, while another would secure the mansion, arresting Isabella. It was supposed to be swift and clean, but they had underestimated her paranoia, her animal instinct for survival. As Damien watched the screen, he saw something that made his heart stop. Isabella ended her call, a triumphant smile on her face. She turned, and for a split second, her eyes seemed to look directly into the hidden camera lens concealed in a smoke detector on the ceiling. Her smile didn't falter. It widened. It was a smile of pure, malevolent intelligence. A smile that said, "I knew it." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small black device. No bigger than a deck of cards. She held it up almost proudly towards the camera. "Did you really think I was that stupid, Damien?" she said, her voice a soft, mocking purr that was still picked up by the microphone. She pressed a button on the device. Instantly, every screen in the control room went black. "Signal jammer!" Marcus yelled, slamming his fist on the console. "She's cut our feeds. All wireless cameras are down. She knew." Panic flared in the room. They were blind. The police team was already moving in, but they were expecting a compliant, unsuspecting target, not one who was aware of the surveillance and likely prepared for a confrontation. Isabella was not just a con artist, she was a professional, always one step ahead. Damien's mind raced. His first thought was for his mother. "Mama! Is she secure?" Amina was already speaking into a walkie-talkie, a low-tech backup they had in place. "Elena is with me in the safe room, sir. We are secure." A wave of relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The police were going in blind. Isabella could be armed. She could have a contingency plan, an escape route. The element of surprise was gone. The carefully constructed trap had just been shattered. But Marcus was a professional too. "Fail-safe," he grunted, typing a new set of commands into his keyboard. She jammed the wireless, but she doesn't know about the hard lines. A second later, a few of the screens flickered back to life, showing grainy black and white images from a few select cameras wired directly into the mansion's security mainframe. The audio was gone, but they had eyes again. On the screen showing the main hallway, they saw her. She was moving fast, a small pistol now in her hand, heading not for an exit but towards the east wing, towards Damien's main office, where he kept a private safe. The police team burst through the front door, a swarm of black-clad officers fanning out through the house. The silent takedown had become a tense, dangerous raid. On the screen, they watched as Isabella reached the office, clearly intending to grab something before making her escape. Just as she reached for the handle, the police team rounded the corner, their weapons raised. The grainy image showed the final desperate standoff. A cornered snake making its last stand. The grainy, silent footage on the hardwired camera felt like a scene from a movie. Isabella, no longer the picture of grace and elegance, looked feral. She spun around, the pistol in her hand looking like a toy against the backdrop of the heavily armed police unit. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed she would open fire, a final desperate act of defiance. The officers screamed commands that Damien and the others in the control room could not hear. Then, as if realizing the absolute futility of her situation, her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her. Slowly, she placed the gun on the floor and raised her hands in surrender. Simultaneously, across town, the second police team breached Julian Croft's hotel room, catching him completely by surprise as he packed a suitcase full of cash. The conspiracy was over. The predators were caged. The immediate danger had passed, but the emotional fallout was just beginning. The mansion, which had been a stage for so much deception, now felt like a crime scene crawling with detectives and forensics teams. In the days that followed, the full scope of Isabella and Julian's crimes came to light. They were responsible for the deaths of at least 2 other wealthy men, including Michael Renner, whose boating accident was found to have been orchestrated with a slow-acting, untraceable poison. They had bilked dozens of people in smaller scams, like the one in Amina's village. The evidence, including the full confession recorded before Isabella activated the jammer, was overwhelming. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Michael Renner's mother was released from the care facility, her name cleared, and she was tearfully reunited with her grandchildren. The news sent shockwaves through the elite circles Damien inhabited, a cautionary tale about the beautiful, charming snakes that often lurked in their gilded gardens. But Damien found he cared little for the gossip or the headlines. His world had been irrevocably changed, his perspective fundamentally shifted. He had been stripped of his naivety, a painful but necessary process. He finally understood that true value had nothing to do with stock portfolios or market shares. A week after the arrests, Damien sat with his mother and Amina in the garden. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance a sweet counterpoint to the bitterness of the recent past. The air of tension that had hung over the house for months was gone, replaced by a quiet, peaceful calm. Damien looked at the 2 women who had been his anchors through the storm. His mother, whose gentle wisdom had been his lighthouse, and Amina, whose quiet courage had been his shield. He knew then what he had to do. "Amina," he said, his voice full of a sincerity she had never heard from him before. "You are no longer an employee in this house. The idea is absurd. You are family. This is your home for as long as you wish it to be." Tears welled in Amina's eyes, and for the first time she allowed herself a broad, brilliant smile. "But I also know your heart is in Kufama," Damien continued. "And a promise was made to your village that was broken. I intend to see that promise kept." He told her his plan. He was establishing a new foundation, dedicated to rural development and education. Its first project, under her direct supervision, would be the complete revitalization of Kufama. They would build not just one well, but a modern irrigation system for their farms. They would build not just a school, but a community centre with a library and medical clinic. He was transferring the $10 million he had put in the joint account with Isabella, the bait that had sealed her fate, to a new account in the foundation's name. It was poetic justice. The money she had intended to steal and kill for would now be used to rebuild the community she had once destroyed. Amina was speechless, her tears now flowing freely. Tears not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it was overwhelming. The hope that had been stolen from her people was being returned, 100-fold. She would not just be a witness to its restoration, she would be the architect of it. The story of the billionaire, his fiancée, and the maid became a modern folk tale whispered in the halls of power and around village fires. It wasn't a story about the triumph of wealth, but about the triumph of character. It was a story about the quiet strength that often resides in the humblest of people and the corrosive nature of greed. Damien Sterling, the man who had almost lost everything, had found a new kind of wealth. It was the wealth of loyalty, the treasure of wisdom, and the profound peace that comes from using one's power not for personal gain, but for the healing of others. His house was no longer just a mansion. It was a home, protected by the unshakable bond between a son, his wise mother, and the quiet woman from a small village who had done the unthinkable. She had not only stood up to evil, she had reminded them all that the brightest lights are often found in the most unexpected places, and that the truest measure of a person is not what they have, but what they have the courage to protect.